Hook, did McLaren secretly cross the line by copying Ferrari's most dangerous weapon? Or is this the biggest loophole exploited in modern Formula One? Because what the FIA discovered in Japan is not a simple test. It is a possible maneuver calculated to replicate a system that is already changing the championship from the shadows. The beginning of this story is not a coincidence, much less a simple technical advance within Formula One. It is the result of a 2026 season that begins with hidden tensions, where each team desperately seeks an advantage in a completely new regulation, full of gray areas that only the brightest or the most risky are able to detect. In this context, Ferrari was the first to hit the table, not with an improvement visible to the naked eye, but with a solution that forced the entire paddock to stop and look twice at what was happening at the back of their car. What seemed like an insignificant detail ended up being an engineering masterpiece. A small fin placed near the exhaust that took advantage of a loophole in the 2026 technical regulation. One of those that exist but that almost no one manages to see in time. Ferrari not only saw it, it understood it and exploited it to the fullest. This system allowed the exhaust gases to be redirected, one of the most energetic elements inside the car, towards key areas such as the rear spoiler and the diffuser, generating a double aerodynamic effect that increased the load and improved the general efficiency of the airflow. The impact was not minor. There was talk of up to half a second per lap in ideal conditions, a gigantic advantage in modern Formula One. But this is where the conflict really begins, because in Formula One no secret lasts too long, and when a solution works, rivals do not take long to react. McLaren, which was already in a complicated situation at the start of the season, needed quick answers. They couldn't afford to be left behind as Ferrari moved forward with an idea that seemed to change the rules of the game without directly breaking them. And it is at that point where they make a key decision. Go beyond convention, leave the visible environment of race weekends and take advantage of a strategic moment to investigate in depth what was happening. During the break between Grands Prix, the Woking team traveled to Suzuka to carry out a series of private tests that, apparently, were part of the normal development of the car. But what they were really doing went much further. They installed a specific device at the exhaust outlet, a metal ring designed to measure with extreme precision the behavior of the gases under different engine conditions. Added to this was a network of advanced sensors and microthermometers capable of building a complete thermal map, something that not only reveals temperatures, but also flow patterns, speed, and direction of the gases. This level of detail is neither common nor necessary for standard development, and that is precisely what makes everything change. Because here we are no longer talking about improving a car, we are talking about thoroughly understanding a foreign concept. McLaren wasn't experimenting blindly, it was collecting data with a clear goal: to unlock Ferrari's secret. And although in Formula One copying ideas is not illegal as such, doing so, using such specific tools to replicate a concept based on a regulatory loophole, puts the team in an extremely delicate position. The FIA, aware of the potential of exhaust gases as an aerodynamic tool, something that had already caused controversy in the past, did not take long to intervene. Because the problem is not just what Ferrari did, but what can come next if other teams start to follow the same path. History has already shown that when technology like this gets out of control, the regulations have to react, and this time it does not seem like it will be different. What we are seeing is not simply the beginning of an investigation, it is the beginning of a possible technical war that could redefine the championship. Ferrari opened the door, McLaren appears to have tried to walk through it, and now the FIA has to decide whether that door should have been open in the first place. The scandal reaches its most critical point when the FIA decides to act. And this is where everything stops being a suspicion and becomes a formal investigation that could have enormous consequences for McLaren and the entire grid. Because it is one thing to innovate within the limits of the regulations, and quite another to come dangerously close to replicating a concept that is already under the radar of the Federation. The key to this second act is not only in what McLaren did, but in what the FIA believes they were really trying to do. The tests in Suzuka did not go unnoticed. In an environment where every movement is watched, where every new part is photographed and analyzed by rivals and technical delegates, the deployment of sensors and devices in the MCL40's exhaust system raised immediate suspicions. It was not a simple reliability test or a conventional performance tune, it was a massive collection of extremely specific data on the thermal and dynamic behavior of the exhaust gases. And that, in the current context, had only one logical interpretation within the paddock. McLaren was trying to decipher the Ferrari concept piece by piece. This is where the FIA starts to look beyond the obvious. Because the regulation does not directly prohibit studying the behavior of the car, or even analyzing the flow of gases in depth, but it does establish clear limits on the aerodynamic use of these. The problem arises when analysis is not an end in itself, but rather a means to replicate a solution that is already exploiting a loophole. In other words, the Federation is not only investigating what McLaren did on the track, but also the intention behind those tests, something much more difficult to prove, but also much more delicate. The main concern lies in a domino effect. If McLaren manages to fully understand Ferrari's system and implement it in its own car, it would not only reduce the Italian team's advantage, but it would open the door for the rest of the grid to do the same. And in that scenario, the FIA would lose control over a critical area of the regulations, returning to an era where exhaust gases once again become a dominant aerodynamic tool, something that had already been eliminated in the past precisely because of its excessive impact on performance. But there is an even more sensitive point in this whole story. Legality is not black and white. Ferrari managed to get its system approved because, technically, it is within the limits of the 2026 regulation. However, this approval does not imply that the concept is untouchable. If the FIA determines that other teams are trying to replicate it in a way that distorts the spirit of the rule, it could intervene not only against McLaren, but against the original solution itself. And that is where the conflict escalates to another level, because it is no longer a question of a team under investigation, but of a possible complete reinterpretation of the technical regulations. Inside the paddock, the reactions were immediate. Some teams see this situation as an opportunity, hoping that the FIA will limit or outright ban these types of developments to level the playing field. Others, however, are watching closely, ready to launch into developing their own versions if the Federation does not act quickly. This tension creates an environment of total uncertainty, where each decision can alter the competitive balance of the season. And in the middle of all this is McLaren, in an extremely compromised position. Because if the FIA concludes that its testing at Suzuka crossed a line, it could face technical sanctions, limitations on development, or even the obligation to scrap any progress based on that data. But if they manage to defend their position and demonstrate that everything was done within the legal margins, they could become the team that unlocked a new technological battle in Formula One. This act does not close the conflict, it intensifies it. The investigation remains open, the questions increase and tension grows on and off the track. Because now it's no longer just about who has the fastest car, but about who is willing to push the limits of the regulations further without getting caught. The outcome of this scandal is not a simple closure of the investigation. It is a turning point that can completely redefine the 2026 season and, in the worst-case scenario, alter the technical direction of Formula One in the short term. Because when the FIA comes into play in a situation like this, the consequences are never small, and what is on the table is not only a possible sanction against McLaren, but the validity of an entire design philosophy that Ferrari has put in place. If the FIA determines that McLaren crossed the line, the impact would be immediate and forceful. The team could be forced to scrap any development related to the exhaust system, lose weeks or even months of work, and be left completely out of the fight at a time where every update is critical. But the hardest thing would not only be the technical aspect but also the strategic blow, because it would mean that they bet everything on a path that they should never have explored. In such a tight championship, that kind of mistake is not easily recovered. However, there is an even more explosive scenario, one that many within the paddock fear and others hope, that the FIA will not only question McLaren, but decide to close the regulatory loophole that allowed Ferrari to develop its system in the first place. This would open a completely different battle, because Ferrari would go from being the team that found the advantage to becoming the main one affected by a rule change in the middle of the season. And in Formula One, when your greatest weapon is taken away, you not only lose performance, you lose the dominant position that you worked so hard to build. These types of decisions are not new in the history of sports. When an innovation threatens to unbalance the competition or escape the control of the regulations, the FIA acts, even if that means intervening in the middle of the championship. And here the risk is evident. Allowing exhaust gases to once again become a key aerodynamic element could trigger a technological war that is impossible to stop, with all teams investing massive resources in an area that had already been considered dangerous in the past. But there is also the other side of the coin. If the FIA concludes that everything remains within the legal limits, even if it is in a gray area, then there will be no turning back. McLaren would be legitimized in its approach, Ferrari would maintain its advantage, and the rest of the teams would be forced to react immediately. That would mean a brutal technical climb, where each team will try to develop its own version of the concept, pushing the regulations to the absolute limit. And this is where the championship changes completely. It would no longer be just a question of who has the best car in general terms, but of who manages to dominate this new technical battlefield. Teams that are currently behind could find in this area an opportunity to make up ground, while the leaders would have to defend their position in a much more uncertain environment. In the midst of all this, there is a reality that cannot be ignored. Formula One lives on these moments. Of controversies, of innovations to the limit, of decisions that generate debate and divide opinions. This scandal is not an exception, it is part of the DNA of the sport. But it's also a reminder of how fine the line is between genius and illegality, between being the team that changes history, or the one that pays the price for trying. The FIA verdict will not only close this case, it will open the next chapter of the season. One where the rules can change, where advantages can disappear overnight, and where each team will have to decide how far they are willing to go to win. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.